Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world and what time you end up watching this on YouTube afterwards. Thank you for joining us for this week's Global Lawyers of Canada Virtual Mentor Office Hours. This week, we are very lucky to have joining us Dessa Nguyen. Dessa is an associate with Wilson Laycraft in Calgary in Alberta, with a practice in complex commercial and civil litigation. I stole this from the website. Throughout Dessa's time as a law student at the University of Victoria, Dessa volunteered at the Legal Information Clinic, was president of the International Human Rights Law Association, and provided research assistance to several professors in the area of civil procedure, health law, and discrimination issues. Prior to joining Wilson Laycraft, Dessa worked at a large regional firm, a national business law firm, and multiple and major international. Dessa is also a member of the Mental Wellness and Awareness Committee for the Canadian Bar Association, which brings us nicely to today's topic, litigation life hacks, maintaining mental wellness to kick butt in the courtroom and beyond. Welcome, Dessa, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Siobhan. It's my pleasure to join the Global Lawyers Canada Virtual Mentorship Series. I really struggled with coming up with like a catchy introduction line for today's talk, because I know how the subject of mental health and mental wellness can be a bit of a sensitive area for some people, but it is a reality for us lawyers, especially because I think they were saying 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 lawyers in Canada will be afflicted with one or more mental health issues. And, we are obviously all the professions have their challenges, but I think lawyers were particularly challenged in that there's this kind of expectation that we're always composed and well-versed in the law. We're expected by our clients and our colleagues and our superiors and the court to be on the ball in terms of our arguments and our demeanor. And as you are probably aware, we work sometimes ungodly hours, right? And even when you're in a boutique or a trial firm, those hours, for example, I moved from like quote unquote big law to like small law, but the hours they're still very much the same, particularly if you are facing an emergency application or injunction application. You've been served and you have 5 days to respond, and you've been served with a massive document and lots of exhibits, and you have to work through it and know the case law and know your client's position. And usually the client, especially if they're not particularly sophisticated, will give you little chunks and pieces every now and then, and you're usually down to the very last minute, down to the wire. So naturally, those kinds of factors in the environment just kind of create, what I think to be like an equation for, mental health struggles, right? And if we're not taking good care of ourselves and addressing all the other aspects of our lives, and then it just confounds and it tends to build up. And so I wanted to speak to how mental wellness can be a lighthearted subject, right? Like you were talking about earlier the Peloton bike. I know Pelotons are very, very popular amongst lawyers particularly, and I don't know what it is, and maybe it's because we're really competitive. For our viewers who I'm sorry?
I think that's part of it. I think there's like that little inner competitiveness with ourselves, and it's so easy to track and see your progression.
Exactly.
I also think it's because you can jump on it at any time of the day, because
Yeah.
it's literally sitting in your living room or your spare bedroom or your basement, like wherever you put it. So there's no excuse. It doesn't matter what time you're working, when you're coming home or when you're leaving, it's like right there. So there's really no excuse.
Right, yeah. And for any of the viewers who aren't familiar with the Peloton, it's just like a stationary bike, but it's got a screen on it. It's very interactive. You've got a coach and you can see the leaderboard, and you can put it to the side, but oftentimes for me, it motivates myself to see myself rise up in the ranks, and then you get points, and it just like feeds all those like little weird lawyerly quirks that we live for.
Yeah. I got a star yesterday.
Right.
Personal best.
Right. And then the music's great. And yeah, so exercise, first and foremost, is always so key. And it's one of those things that fall to the wayside when we feel a time crunch. And, I know it's like probably belabored, but I know for myself, if I don't work out on a regular basis, and COVID has been extra trying, I can sense like that kind of like dark clouds like going over my head. And, especially when you've got clients who they themselves are experiencing incredible amounts of stress, especially as a litigator. It's just by nature an adversarial system. They feel their own anxieties and their own stressors, particularly if you don't have a sophisticated client, get thrown onto you, right? So you don't just wear the lawyer hat, you also kind of play the counselor too. And I feel like law school, and even the seminars that we attend, and whatever training that we get whenever we join a new firm, it doesn't really prepare us for that client aspect that is a soft people skill. And I know for myself, going from a large firm where like baby lawyers were just given like small pieces of a file, and we very rarely get one-on-one contact with the client themselves. Going from that to running my own files at a trial firm, and Wilson Laycraft is very well known for its trial lawyers, and keeping up with that reputation of excellence. And people think, oh, you came from a big firm, so you should be excellent at what you do, at being a trial lawyer. It's daunting, right? And then boom, you get, like, especially in civil litigation, you get a client who you slotted yourself like a half-hour call or 1-hour call, and suddenly it's turned into a 3-hour crying session, and or what have you, right? Like, and it's natural because some people have never ever been involved in litigation proceedings before, and it's an expensive process. It's daunting, right? And not everybody wakes up in the morning expecting to be sued, right? So as litigators and advocates for our client, like, we have to be prepared, mentally, physically, and emotionally, for that kind of heaviness that comes with litigation proceedings.
How do you do that? I mean, it sounds like a really, I'm sure there's not one straight answer for doing it, but if you're a junior and you're coming into this for the first time, what's like your number one go-to kind of like, how do you cope with that?
Well, I will be candid. The first few weeks, there were a lot of closed doors with tears. I'll take like a little break, 5 minutes, ball out, and then I'm like, okay, I'm a professional. I remind myself, and then I just break it up into the smallest pieces possible, right? And it can be overwhelming when somebody's coming at you, and it's not just legal issues. They're talking about their financial struggles, and then there's questions about whether they have mental capacity, and I'll get back to that later. But the situation is no longer like a law exam test where, you know, you get this fact pattern and then you've got an amount of time and you can look up the law. It's like it becomes a very personal service that you provide. And how do I, you know, I I meditate a lot, or breathing exercises. You know, I follow certain podcasts and audiobooks. Just and if you had asked me like 5 years ago if I would be into it, I would have laughed at you. But you know, I'm actually humbled by how much those methods work in terms of, you know, you're in the moment, it's high stress, and you know you got maybe a 2-minute washroom break to kind of wring out the high emotions that come with some civil lit files, and then you can gather yourself back. So for me, it's breathing, like very much like coming back to your breath. I know it sounds like so new age-ish, but it works.
A month ago, I would have been with you like 5 years ago. I'd been like, yeah, that's so hippie. That's not like my thing at all. But having recently taken up meditation, I can fully appreciate where it would have been useful. In my one time I've been to court, I bawled my eyes out in the middle of the court, and even the judge was like, would you like a moment? And I was like, yes, please. Yes, I would like to go outside and take a moment, please. That's when I realized I wasn't supposed to be a litigator.
Right. And, you know, law schools, they're prepping you to be a litigator, right? And so, you know, even if you find the material fascinating and you think, you know, oh, I like the idea of the courtroom, but like the other parts of it, like nobody really tells you until you get there. And, you know, in my 5 years of being a lawyer now, it's, I've seen like all lawyers are under a great deal of stress, but the lawyers who really, really, you know, need a timeout, or, you know, who've really struggled in the mental wellness area, I find are trial lawyers, because it's a tremendous amount of pressure, you know, and you know, sometimes you're running the trial by yourself from the get-go and you don't have the mentorship available to you. I'm fortunate in that, like at our firm, I'm the baby lawyer there. You know, the average age at my firm is like 60 years old, right? And so I can always turn to them for guidance. And that's another thing that I find helps like calm me down, but not everybody has that available. So I find that, you know, you hear it, but it's actually so important, like tending to your basic needs, like making sure you're eating well enough, you know, and getting like sunshine and the proper nutrition, right? And you know, nobody told you that you'd probably need to always be eating takeout or getting like a food prep, like a prepped meal delivery service, right? And again, not everybody's prepared for that, right? And especially if you want to be playing different roles in your community or in your family, if you've got children, if you've got a spouse, and you had all these other expectations that suddenly get disappointed by the amount of responsibility that is entailed in, you know, running a full practice in litigation. And you know, we don't have as many clients as solicitors do that pick up the phone and say, hey, I want this done yesterday, right? Like that doesn't really happen, but we do get injunctions, and the timelines are still like you get like 3 or 4 or 5 days, right? Unless a client's been sitting on it, and then you get like 24 hours to respond. But that's not as common, I find, for us litigators. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, like feel free. But I know my friends who are solicitors, like you guys get that all the time. Like, you know, you need, right? And so the mental wellness part isn't just for litigators necessarily, because lawyers generally, like I said at the beginning, like we're under tremendous amounts of stress. The societal stigma for lawyers is that we're kind of perfect, have it all together, we're emotionless, and we know everything all the time, right? And we don't sleep, right?
That part they'd be correct with.
But I think going back to the other things that I need to do to kind of bring myself back is mentorship is so important. And I understand, a lot of lawyers, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be sole practitioners. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have somebody or a team of people that you can pick up the phone or reach out to and just like, hey, like, I need some guidance on this because XYZ, right? And I've probably taken that liberty to a great extent at my firm, but I feel like they spoil me a little bit because they always say, oh, look, she's like a big firm survivor, but she actually doesn't know anything about running a trial, right? And so I'm so thankful for the senior lawyers at my firm for that reason. But if you're not able to work closely with other people, other lawyers, I highly stress that you get involved with your local associations, or if not, like doing something like this Global Lawyers Canada like virtual series. Just as long as you don't feel like you're alone and you can always reach out. I think that support is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had some mentors came on April the 30th. If you want to go back and look at our previous sessions on YouTube, and there were 2 criminal defense lawyers, and they came on and said very much the same thing, that they've heavily relied on the Trial Lawyers Association and the mentoring that's formed within that group, and that many of them actually go to a bar or a coffee shop on a Friday afternoon, towards the end of the day on a Friday, to like basically just download and debrief with each other after the week, because as you say, most of them are sole practitioners, so they don't have, a person down the corridor.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can knock on the door of, and so yeah, they suggested that, and also like the section meetings through the CBA.
Yeah, so one of the most senior partners at my firm, he told me, because I would work through lunch, and he says, you need to always take lunch. And if it's not taken for working out or going for a walk and enjoying the sunshine, you should always fill those lunches up with meeting with other lawyers. And if it's not for networking, it's to just decompress, and share your war stories, because we're all engaging in some sort of battle, right, in our profession, and it's hard to speak to people who are not in the profession and feel that kind of understanding, right? And it's not to like fault them, but we have such the legal profession has so many facets that are in and of themselves very, very heavy, right? And can be somewhat burdensome, and it takes a fellow lawyer to understand. So if there's one takeaway that I would say might be a little different from the general advice that you hear on this subject, but all that advice is good and it's important, is to always fill up, always take your lunch if you can, and fill it up with either working on yourself, exercise, resting, or seeing your fellow lawyers, like catching it, like going for coffee, right, going for a lunch, and if there's a lawyer that you've even seen in the gallery in the courtroom, and you've exchanged cards with, give them a call. Because there's something really unique and interesting about our profession, and that people will always I always find that they're there for you. Like, you know, a lot of lawyers will give me their card and I'll say, oh, you know, I'm not going to call them, but I'll call them and they'll pick up, and or if I email them, they'll respond immediately. If I'm just like interested in their practice area or even seeking advice, like just general advice. And it's a unique kind of collegial atmosphere in what is like inherently an adversarial system. Yeah. So.
Have you found that particularly because you're female, that people are more approachable? Like, it does that kind of sort of separation between the different sexes, does that actually play to your advantage in that sense of people, you know, being more approachable, do you think? Or do you think it's just your general lovely personality?
You know, I think being a female it's a double-edged sword. And as also, there's not a lot of women of Asian descent in the courtroom. And so I found some lawyers, and bless their hearts, but it's kind of like, oh, that's cute. You know,
Yeah.
and so it's frustrating, but it opens the door, and then I use my dazzling personality. I get my foot in the door, but then they see that there's actually depth to this person, and the types of questions they have to ask are not superficial, and then once we cross that barrier, and that barrier is for me at least, there more often than not, right? And so that's something that I feel like people, as a woman, they're like, oh yeah, she's a woman, and so maybe there's the just like unconscious draw, but then they'll say, oh, she's a female Vietnamese litigator, which there's probably like 3 or 4 of us in all of Calgary, and so they find it like there's some novelty there, right? But then when it comes to when I actually reach out to people, I'm really curious about their strategies in managing, because mental health is very important to me. I have had some very close friends in the legal profession, you know, go down some really dark rabbit holes, and I feel like the biggest thing was the tools weren't readily available to them, or they weren't as obvious or clear that they had these tools. And so I think it's something that, you know, lawyers should not be ashamed of, despite the stigma that's attached to mental health. That's why I wanted to say it's like mental wellness, right? And mental wellness is a much more palatable topic than saying, you know, mental illness or mental health, right?
A stigma is still very real, I think. I know I've spoken personally to a few people, and they were the conversation we had was very much about, I feel safe talking to you. I don't know how to talk to other people because I don't know how then they're going to then treat me because of it. And so they almost put a barrier in front of them receiving support, because they knew the support was out there, but they almost had a barrier in front of them from you know, opening the door to that because of the potential stigma that there is around mental health issues and mental wellness in general for lawyers.
Mm-hmm. And I think again, I'm not sure the demographic of viewers of these videos, but speaking for myself and baby lawyers like myself, and I'm guessing, you know, you and Daniel, because I used to work with Daniel, that our generation of lawyers has the benefit of being able to speak more openly about mental health. You know, I can't imagine how difficult it was to be a lawyer struggling at a time when mental wellness and was not really, it was like a dirty secret, right? And so I think we're very fortunate, and I count my blessings all the time in that we can, I think we're like, our profession is changing a little bit, and I can see it. But court procedures are still what they are. And, deadlines and rules and regulations are still what they are. And clients' views of what litigators are, in my experience, are still very much shaped of what they see in the media. And so, they just expect you to be on it all day, every day, answering their calls at all hours of the day. And, you can never guarantee a win, right? And sometimes the law is just not on your side. Sometimes the adjudicator's not going to see it the way you and your client see it. And there's certain consequences that affect you emotionally and psychologically and mentally, that you need to be able to just cope with, right? And so I was saying, I think before with you, Siobhan, before we started, the last couple of weeks have been very interesting for me.
Yeah.
It's all part of the public record, so obviously I'm not going to disclose too much detail, but I had a client come to me who had been through a number of other lawyers in the past. And, there were suspicions that she was a vexatious litigant. So, she's just like in the courtrooms because she just is litigious, right? But it was quite apparent to me within my second phone call and within our first meeting that I thought she had mental capacity issues. The difficulty is that she herself is a professional and she's excellent at what she does. However, it all crumbles and falls apart outside of her work environment. And so she's not able to, so her prior counsel, from what I'm thinking, is that they're like, okay, well, she runs this type of practice just smoothly. There's no way that mental capacity is an issue. But it just became more and more apparent, and the erratic nature, but of our interactions were really hard on me. However, it's every time she left, I would feel physically drained. Didn't matter what time of day it was, did not matter how much sleep or rest I had gotten. As soon as our interaction was done, I felt drained. My colleagues would comment that I lost the color in my face, and it was it was a subconscious thing because I would just keep pushing through, but I could feel this tightness in my own chest, and then I was like, okay, there's something with this file. And then over time, as I spoke to we have a lawyer assist program here, and it's kind of like counseling services, but lawyers speaking to other lawyers, and it was after a few sessions I recognized that these types of clients are the clients that nobody tells you about, but you've got to deal with them in the best way that is ethical, but also is well within your boundary, right? And it's difficult for us lawyers when we think that we need to be, the champions and the advocate and pursue every avenue for them. But there are some clients that will really, because their understanding of the situation is so skewed by whatever they're struggling with, that you get wrapped up into it. And so you go down all these rabbit holes, and then the bill is so high, and then you feel guilty, and then you write down your time, but then you got your own commitments to fulfill, and it just gets into this vacuous, unhealthy, almost toxic situation. But for myself, I feel that, you know, if I have a client, I can never leave them. And that in itself is, you know, you might say, oh, it's heroic and everything, but it is kind of toxic, right? Because some clients will just take it and go all the way there. And then how good of a lawyer or advocate could you be if you yourself are feeling unwell from overdoing yourself on that file, right? So again, I think reaching out is so key, and not trying to figure it out yourself and reinvent the wheel. The one thing with mental health in the legal system is that it's kind of a new thing, right? And we're all kind of trying to figure it out together. But I don't think it's prudent for anybody to just try to take that burden on by themselves, you know? And so that's why I know I was starting to really unravel, but then I reached out to the senior partners and they're like, hey, kiddo, like, well, they didn't say kiddo, but like, that's the kind of like,
yeah. The dynamic you guys have in the office.
yeah, they're just like, we know you've got, they always call me Lionheart. Like, we know you're Lionheart, but it's just part of the learning process that boundaries need to be drawn. And you don't need to make yourself cold and everything, but you have to recognize that there are some litigants that will take you so far that it will deplete you. And you have to recognize that if your purpose, if you will, is to help people, you aren't doing you're doing everyone a disservice by overextending yourself on a file that has no recourse, right? And so that was the most recent lesson that I had to learn. It was very difficult, especially given the COVID situation. So they call my direct line, it gets rerouted to my cell phone. My cell phone, for some reason, it only rings once or twice, and then I call the client right back, and then they have my cell phone number. And
No.
I know, so for a client at that stage who feels like, you know, you're at their beck and call, they'll text, they'll call at all hours, and then if you miss it, or you're sleeping or you're showering, and it's just like, it gets tricky.
Yep.
So make sure you have your supports. Like, I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and you guys should invest in some like telephone technology that keeps it separate. Next time you guys like do some capital expenditure. We recently joined up with TELUS Connect, and so it's an app that goes onto your phone, and it literally sends my office phone through to my cell phone, but it has a separate number so that you never see that it's my cell phone. They always just think they're calling my office.
Oh.
So it's something you might want to look into. There's probably lots of different versions and companies out there. I just happen to know we use that one, but it's very handy in that it keeps it separate.
Mm-hmm.
And also the voicemail, it does voice recognition, and it'll send you an email with a text of what the voicemail says.
Yeah, so, you know, hi, Joad.
Hi, I'm so sorry.
Jawad, are you walking around outside again?
I'm outside, and this and very strong. And I just happened to be outside, and I was turning on. You know, I kept my video turned off, and then I said that there are certain things that I have to say, so I must turn it on. So, you know, I just, you know, I have 12 years of experience working as a lawyer in Bangladesh. And while working there as a lawyer, and it was the later 5 to 7 years of my legal practice was basically concentrated around litigation. So there was a lot of very stressful courtroom work for which I felt overwhelmed. And I basically became aware of this need to keep your mental well-being at the forefront of your practice after I got introduced to my wife. who is a mental health professional. She's basically a psychotherapist, and she's now en route to being registered as a counselor in Ontario. And we basically formed this organization called Mind Matters, which worked to raise awareness about mental and psychological well-being amongst various different groups, including lawyers. And one of the talked about was the need to sorry, there's a was the need to maintain mental hygiene at a regular level.
Mhm.
And it's basically based on this TED talk that we saw, and it's something that is so necessary because mental health is very much a part of overall well-being. When it never occurs to us to go and seek professional help. And that is something that is absolutely necessary, especially for lawyers or other professionals in stressful work. It is very much required. And I think what is lacking here amongst lawyers, and I've seen this very, very, very strongly amongst lawyers in Bangladesh, there is a lack of awareness which makes them hostile to any talk of lawyers facing mental or psychological difficulties at work. So I think the reason why I give this background is to basically lead me to this question: what do you think we as lawyers or law students in Canada can do to basically raise awareness about this and to create a more congenial atmosphere within which we can feel safe to talk about our mental well-being?
That's a great question, Dessa. Come on, you're on the committee.
Thank you for your input, and it's very insightful about what's going on across the globe, right? Because mental wellness or mental illness or mental health is kind of like a new acceptable thing to talk about generally in the public, let alone in our profession where lawyers are expected to be perfect, right? And we're expected to be always on and don't show any vulnerability, right? And so I think, and we had, oh, forgive me, so the Lawyer Assist program in Calgary here, we had a really, really fascinating panel of, oh, forgive me, I'm going to do a disservice. If you'll recall in the media, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, there was a Supreme Court justice who had a mental wellness issue, and he went missing, and the police went looking for him, and then it became clear that he has struggled with some mental health issues for a very long time, but in silence. And so this panel that we had was comprised of justices and judges and the Supreme Court justice, or the former Supreme Court justice, who just very openly and candidly shared their episodes, right? And they shared their struggles and how prevalent it is, and how back then, again, I keep talking about how fortunate I feel that we're even getting to have this kind of talk so openly, right? Because when you're in that dark place but you have nowhere to go, and you're stuck in your head, and you go into a darker place, right? And I think just more and more, obviously anybody in the profession should feel welcome to speak to these issues, but I would wager that if it became clear that the really prominent lawyers in our city, or more justices and judges came forward, or even justice ministers came forward about their struggles with mental wellness and mental health, I think we would have much more acceptance and understand the unique struggles that those in the legal profession encountered, that really, you know, are not really good breeding grounds for mental wellness, right? Because especially with technology and clients and documents being able to like just get to us immediately, right? We no longer have, you know, the argument that, oh, I wasn't at the office, or the fax wasn't working or anything. It's no longer those excuses, right? Like email, you get the document right away, you're expected, even if you get the document at midnight, it's like, well, you got it at midnight, didn't you? Work through the night, right? Like the technology has evolved rapidly, but we're still just human beings, right? And we still need rest and good food and exercise and things outside of our profession to keep us going, right? And
Absolutely. And I also think that raising awareness amongst lawyers and to just bravely speaking out about mental health issues. Like, for example, I have actually been to therapists to see to seek help regarding my problems, and that is not something shameful for me to talk about.
not at
And it
all.
is something that we should all be encouraging and empowering other lawyers to say and do and bring up, even in front of clients, because there is, I completely resonated with what you said regarding lawyers not being able to bring up uh, their mental or psychological issues in front of their clients, because there is that stigma that clients do feel that, okay, if you have a mental or psychological issue, maybe you're not the right person to do my job.
Right, exactly.
So, so
And
that is something that we need to be telling them, that listen, hey, we're just as human as you are.
mhm.
You may have an issue, we have an issue too, and we are just going to be professional about it and seek professional help, and it's okay to talk about it, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's you know, thankfully with certain movements, mental health is becoming more and more acceptable. But again, I think that what the threshold that needs to be passed is professionals with mental health issues, and more specifically lawyers, right? And so if a lawyer needs to take a month off to just rebalance themselves, that shouldn't affect like how they'll do, like that shouldn't affect the image of how they'll do after they take that period off, right? And so, and another thing is, like, I know lawyers out of all my other professional like colleagues and friends don't take their vacation time, even though they're entitled to it, right? And like, so if you're working all day and they're probably dreaming about I get file nightmares all the time. I don't know about you guys, but if you're dreaming about it, you're thinking about it, you know, you're talking about it with your friends and colleagues. My partner's a lawyer, so we're always talking about our legal, like our struggles. And you're not, and if you have a therapist, and I see a therapist, I think everyone should have a therapist. I just think it's healthy. But if you're always talking about it, thinking about it, but you don't take a vacation, what do you think is going to happen, right? It's not just going to go away on its own. Like, we need to always be able to decompress and not feel like we're constantly on the clock, and not feel guilty for taking time off, right?
Me tomorrow. I am taking a vacation day tomorrow, my first one this year.
Right? And you know, I worked with some of the, like, I've had the fortune to work with some very incredibly brilliant lawyers, but some of those very incredibly brilliant lawyers have recently had some sort of episode. You know, no need to get into the details, but the episode happened, and you know, they could be very, like, they've happened. It's happened at all levels of practice, right? Some of these people had over 30 years of practice. And it just took one thing, and then they had to take a lot of time off, right? And can you imagine how much suffering they had to do alone or quietly, that could have been avoided if they could tell their clients, like, no, like, I need a break.
So how would you do that? I mean, you're 5 years cold now, you've got 5 years worth of experience, and it's tough for a junior to say no at the best of times. And it's tough to say no to your partner, to your senior partner in the office. How do you say no to a client? Like, do you have any tips for how to do that? I mean, obviously every situation is going to be different, so there might not be, one size fits all kind of answer, but is there one kind of tip you could give people?
I don't know why I suddenly developed this confidence when I got to Wilson Lake Craft. Maybe it's just me emulating people who've been in the profession for 45 plus years. When a client gets out of hand, I say, I have to draw a line here. And they say, well, I need this by tomorrow. I'm like, well, the reality is you want this by tomorrow. And there will be no difference if I can provide this to you on, 2 days from now, 3 days from now. They're like, yeah, but I'm paying you. It's like, yes, I get that, but you want me to do a thorough job, not a rush job, right? And so I think, this is where the line needs to be drawn. And, to my fortune, that's never been detrimental for me. And I think when you can start talking to your clients authentically and candidly, and so I talk to my clients very authentically and candidly from the get-go. That's one thing I learned, that why I probably wouldn't do exceptionally well in a very large corporate firm environment, because I'm very candid, and I don't know, I think litigation is so personal that, like, if for us to keep that personal connection, I need to be as authentic with you as you are with me, right? And so if I tell you a line needs to be drawn, I don't draw it because I just want to, like, watch, like, Netflix for that night or whatever. It's like, I'll draw that line when I can feel that a line needs to be drawn, and you got to trust your intuition, right? If your body's just telling you, like, there's no way I can do another all-nighter doing this, you got to tell them, right? And obviously, there's always going to be situations where the deadline, it's an incumbent that you're on the clock, and then you can't draw that line, right? But I think we can all agree that sometimes when our clients say their fire is burning out of control and the house is going to burn down in a second, it's not that case, right? And so I think if you have that kind of relationship with the client, or you can try to develop that rapport with them, just like bring them back from their subjective idea of what needs to happen and say, okay, these are the deadlines that actually need to be met. There's no expectation coming from this way. You're like, well, I just want it. It's like, okay, you want it, but you want it at this price. You want it at this level of, of quality. Give me 2 days. Don't expect it in 6 hours, right?
Great tip.
And I understand it's really difficult when your clients are, like, larger institutions, and if you're in big law, it's tough. Right? But when you're dealing with an individual, I think the best way to do is just speak to them as candidly as possible.
Yeah. Do you think your mental wellness, your own personal mental wellness, has changed, not just in, like, the amount of time you've now been practicing, but also the different environments that you've worked in?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing. Litigation you can be a successful litigator in any size shop, right? And I always tell people, you have to be able to be happy at your shop, like wherever you end up. Because if you're going to be, and it's not just litigators, it's like any lawyer. Like if you can't get along, if the culture doesn't fit, you can't get along with certain personalities. Well, guess what? Those personalities are not going away, right? And especially if, no, we won't get into the details, but especially if for you feel like that certain environment is not working for you, but you're gonna slog through because the paycheck is like, those golden handcuffs, right? It's just not worth it, because I know from experience now, I've been to a few shops. There are certain environments that I had like, I wouldn't say an anxiety attack, but that feeling that I'd never felt before, it keeps coming back ever since that one episode, right? Like it's like this weird piercing sensation. I won't get into like too many details. I probably already have. But you don't want to stay in that kind of environment that creates that, right? And like in today's type of market and like, globalization and how we're able to do this like lifetime from all parts of the world, I think that you should never sell yourself short to think that you need to stay and put up with whatever emotional and mental discomfort that you're dealing with because of whatever, the prestige, the salary, or what have you, right? Because chances are you are where you are because you're a talented and very smart person. And, your mental health, it's such a fragile thing. Like, why would you risk your health, right? Like you wouldn't go into the midst of like crazy traffic to serve a proceeding. So why would you risk your sanity or your mental stability, right?
Absolutely. And if somebody was in one of those situations and they've now got to the point where they've recognized that this is a situation that's ongoing, it's not going to change in the short term, are there any resources that you would recommend that they reach out to? I mean, I know you mentioned the Alberta Lawyers Assist program. I did also tag BC and Ontario, their versions of the same program. But are there any specific resources you would suggest that people maybe reach out to for help, or is it just a matter of like you just take yourself out of that situation?
Well, part of the reason why I say that you need to create your own support system is that your support's often
Dessa froze. Hopefully she's coming back. I think the mountains between us is stopping the signal. I will message her and see if she's okay. For anyone listening, if you do have any questions for Dessa, please do either message Dessa privately in the chat, or by all means you can message me and I will relay the question, or you can ask it yourself. By all means. Oh, I think Dessa is having technical issues, but hopefully she's coming back. Jawad, do you have something to say? Dessa's not here. I think she's going to try and reconnect.
Okay, I just wanted to let you know that I just discovered today that in Ontario, the government via OHIP covers certain counseling costs in light of COVID. So if you basically want to take the help of a counselor or a therapist for your mental issues, you will be covered by the government. So perhaps for people in Ontario, that may be useful.
Yeah, very useful. I don't know how many people are in Ontario. Rachel, are you in Ontario? Are you somewhere fabulous? Are you sitting on a beach?
I'm in Toronto.
You're in Ontario too. Okay, cool. So maybe not a beach then.
No, sadly.
Yeah, me neither. Well, there is one here. I mean, I do have a beach down the road, but I'm not at it right now. It's very full of people, so I'm avoiding it.
It's a good plan.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Dessa is going to be able to rejoin us, but do you guys have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to add in, any feedback on this session for me? Anything you'd like to say? Anything you'd like for us to do in a future session?
This is the first session I've attended, so it was quite interesting. Wasn't really totally sure what to expect, but it's very helpful. It's
Okay.
always
It wasn't a complete letdown?
no. It's always nice to chat with other lawyers, and especially when they're being so open.
Yes, absolutely.
Candid.
And yeah, Dessa was not holding her punches at all. What area of practice are you in, Rachel?
Mostly wills and estates, and I'm sort of trying to build up an employment practice. I really just sort of jumped into full-time practice a couple months ago.
Oh, welcome back.
Thank you. And I have a small child, so when I was in law school, I always loved real estate, and I don't know, I got a little sidetracked from that in recent years. And then once I had my child, I was like, oh, he's too young, with the 9 to 5 of the land registry, I can't really manage that kind of thing. But then today I was dealing with something that touched on it, and I thought, gosh, some people do this so badly. I could do so much of a better job if I was doing it.
Oh, there you go. Maybe you found your niche.
Maybe, but no.
I think the one thing with the situation that we're all finding ourselves in now is there's so many opportunities now that we possibly could capitalize on for our careers, because the pandemic has shown that so many things can be done in a different way, that maybe before as a profession we've been very hesitant to make some changes, because there was that attitude of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of attitude a little bit. But now there may be more of an opportunity. We do things a little bit differently and try new things.
For sure.
So we'll watch this space for you.
I'm sorry.
Back.
I didn't even, I was like, well, everybody's faces are frozen.
Yours froze too. We were all sat here going, Dessa?
I'm sorry. Sorry, I was like on this like train of thought, and I feel like I might have lost it.
Well, we'll fill you in on what we were just talking about.
Okay.
So you can capture your thought back up. Jawad was just telling us that there's a new sort of legislation that's come out in Ontario through OHIP. Is it, Jawad?
So I was just telling Siobhan that in Ontario, previously before the pandemic, if you wanted to seek the help of a mental health professional, it would not be covered by the government through the Ontario, the OHIP program, the health program. But now, because of the pandemic, they are covering it. So it's actually free.
Oh.
So I actually booked in my first appointment with my counselor today.
Oh, good.
And I just thought that it would be a very useful thing to share.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, good. That makes me really happy, because COVID is really, that was the first thing I was worried about, was that like when before we knew that we could be outside and everybody thought the world was ending, and we're all, relegated to our homes and not, showering or dressing appropriately or whatever. I was worried about people who who are alone and who might struggle with mental wellness, right? Because I know for me, I'm a very extroverted person and I need to constantly be socializing. And I'm very fortunate that my partner, he's also a lawyer, so so I get to bounce my ideas off of him. But you know, I remember when I was living alone in Victoria, and yeah, I would do video calls and call my friends and family regularly. But I think like that was my first serious bout of like depression. And I can't imagine what it's like. Not only are you like restricted, like, but like when I was living out there by myself, I was still able to go out and meet people and everything. But for so long, we were just restricted just to stay at home, right? Can't even go, like, we were getting our groceries delivered. And we weren't even like going out to the grocery store. So,
Absolutely, and I think this is also a very important thing for a lot of the NCA students to talk about, especially those who have just migrated to Canada, because what the experience that they face here is completely different from what they're accustomed to. They're far removed from their families in many cases. They're far removed from their friends. The time difference makes it almost impossible to even schedule a Zoom call at an appropriate time.
right.
So it's a very lonely experience. And that experience makes it all the more necessary for a person to be in touch with the a constant realization that they need to tend to their mental health.
Absolutely.
And that is something that I think, GLC is doing a fantastic job with NCA students. I am an NCA student myself. I have benefited immensely from it. And I think, Siobhan, going forward, maybe this is something that you would like to address with NCA students, taking that help,
No, absolutely. It's something that personally I believe very strongly that we should be talking more about our mental wellness. It's something that I thought I had a very strong mental capacity and mental wellness. And I am one of those people where this pandemic has really hit me in ways I've never experienced before. And it's made me realize that this is some things that some people go through regularly. These are feelings they have regularly. And for me, it's just, I hope this is a very new thing and hopefully won't last. And I've had complete, like, crippling bouts of homesickness. I've lived here in Canada for 11 years now, and I've never really suffered with homesickness before, but now I'm having it for the first time. And so it's like, oh, okay, yeah. So it's definitely something that I'm sure a lot of people must be feeling many different feelings right now. And yeah, knowing that you can talk to other people and there's other people who may be having similar difficulties, struggles, as you called it, different episodes, to varying different degrees and for various different trigger reasons as well, with so much happening right now. That is very important. I do try and post in our Facebook group with various different things that I see. I'm probably not as active as I should be. So do call me out on it. Do, like, if you see things, call me out on it.
You're very active. You're very active.
But, on certain topics, maybe not so. I could be more active on some of those topics that are sometimes a bit more difficult to talk about. I do utilize Bell Let's Talk when they have that initiative, which Jawad, and for those people who are relatively new to Canada, maybe you're not aware of it, but Bell, the telephone company, sponsors Bell Let's Talk week. I think it's a week long.
I think it's a day, whereas if you use that hashtag, they will put money towards every time that hashtag is used.
That's it. And that definitely, I think, for me, has made it more of an awareness thing that that professionals and the society feels a bit more they can talk about it, at least during Bell Let's Talk period. And then some organizations have taken that further and have, initiated programs internally, which I think does help. Whether people feel comfortable accessing those programs internally is a very different subject still. And there's all sorts of reasons why people don't access those. I know that's something probably Dessa, you and the CBA committee are probably working with, that is how to break down some of those barriers as to why people don't necessarily access it. Is it they don't know the services are there, or is it potentially that there's the personal barrier and then other barriers that are put in place to accessing those services?
Based on, and there's different people with different theories of what the issue is, but I'm a firm believer that it's the personal barrier, because no one, especially when we lawyers, we're high achievers, right? And it's hard for us to admit to ourselves that we're struggling in this area. And then the stigma around mental health, but particularly mental health for legal professionals, is just exemplifies that personal barrier that people struggle with. And so, that's why when I'm with my lawyer friends, we just very candidly share that, this therapist is great and that therapist is that, I'm trying this antidepressant and that, because the thing is, like, as soon as we can talk about it candidly and in an open manner, it loses the stigma, and it loses the deleterious effects of admitting that you need some assistance, or that you might have mental illness, or again, like, I feel like certain words trigger certain kinds of connotations, so I like to say mental wellness, right? And I find that it's more palatable amongst the broader audience when you call it wellness as opposed to mental illness or mental health, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we should be able to use those words, and hopefully we can get there. But the fact that we've got to be creative in how, I had to make the tagline funny. I was like, how to kick butt in the courtroom and beyond. But the thing is, it's like, you're not going to kick butt if you're struggling deep down inside, but you feel like you can't share, right? And it's very prevalent. And I don't think it's just my bad luck or what have you. I've worked at tons of big firms, and even at this firm, the stories are shared, and you recognize it's a real prevalent thing in our profession. And we're deep thinkers too, right? And I'm not saying that other professions aren't deep thinkers, but our trade is our thoughts, and our thoughts being articulated in our time. That's what lawyers do. We don't, perform surgery. We don't clean teeth. We don't build bridges. We think thoughts. We read and distill information, and then make arguments, and then draft agreements. And sometimes those agreements don't go well. But it's all mental work. Like, what we do, what we provide as a service is completely mental work, so
yeah, we need to take care of this.
Yeah, if this is what is getting us those massive paychecks and what have you, whatever is important to you, but if this is what's important, why not take care of it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they say you have to do Sudoku to keep your brain active.
Right.
Because you have to train your brain all the time. Then we need to train our brain in other ways as well to allow it to have that time to relax and recover and switch off. And that's a skill. Mm-hmm. And it's not a skill that we're all innately born with. It's a skill that we have to learn in the same way that we had to learn to catch a ball, which I have still not managed to learn how to do properly. I'm a big fan of missing the ball, apparently, but it's a skill. And sometimes we need a coach to help us with that skill, so that we can become proficient, or even an expert eventually, hopefully, possibly, if that's how far we want to go.
Oh no, is this me again? Oh.
And I think that's where you know, as you say, seeking out a professional is always great. You know, that's how we get better at playing tennis and, you know, doing things like that. So why not seek out a mental wellness professional? There's lots of different forms of those, I believe. So yeah, we should be, you know, doing that, or as you say, talking to your peers. And I know that when we had one of our previous sessions with our criminal defense lawyers, they made the point of saying, not all of your peers are equal in terms of their experience and in terms of being able to empathize and really have been in those trenches the same as you have. So they were like, sometimes, you know, as a criminal defense lawyer, they were like, it's not ideal that I talk to you, Siobhan, as, you know, a securities lawyer,
Right.
because I don't go into the courtroom. So I can imagine possibly what it's like, but I've not experienced it. So I can't truly appreciate and understand on the same level. So sometimes you do need to seek out that peer group
Yes.
who do a similar thing to you, who can really understand and just let you together talk and support one another in that way.
Yeah, again, I'll just reiterate, like, support is like my number one like lesson. If there's one thing to be drawn from today's talk, is support. And you know, like you said, your support group might need to vary or be specific to whatever it is that they can, like, you can speak and have a flow of ideas and feelings in the most, like, you know, uninhibited manner, right? And so, you know, when I call up Dan, like, sometimes, and I'm just like sharing my struggles, he's like, that's why I would never be a litigator. But at the same time, when it's quite candidly, like, certain law firms breed certain environments that affect, you know, how you operate, and so we can connect on that level when I'm struggling with, you know, communicating with a superior or a personality that I might not necessarily mesh with, and we connect on that level, right? But in terms of, you know, if I'm struggling with specific rules of court and like, I should probably speak to another litigator. And granted, like, you're not expected to have like a massive support group, but like, why not try, right? And why not just reach out and see who you jive with and who becomes your champions or your support groups, right? And you likewise will probably be their support one day, you know, or you could support each other all the way along, right? Like, I have other friends that, like, we're floundering along, but then, like, we feel so much better after our little meeting.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't know. I just think, like, mental wellness is, you know, it is a challenge on a societal level, but what needs to happen first is that lawyers need to recognize that within our profession that this is a real thing. And you know, some people self-medicate, and we have the highest incidence of substance abuse of all the professions. We're the third highest for suicide. And you know, that might be because we're not talking about it enough with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dessa, on that note, because it was very powerful, thank you very much for giving us your time this evening. It is very much appreciated. Jawa, thank you for your questions and your contributions as always. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us for your first ever virtual mental health hours. I'm so excited for you. Hope to see you again. And remember, guys, if you do have any questions for Dessa, you can contact her, I'm sure, via her LinkedIn page. She'll be more than happy to try and answer your questions or steer you in the right direction to somebody who can. And if there are any topics you would like us to cover in future sessions, please do contact me. We have built out our list for the rest of the month, but we are accepting all sorts of mentors for July and onwards. So we do want to keep this going, and we want to make it relevant to all of you. So if there is something you want some mentoring on, and it can be pretty specific, it can be pretty general, please do let me know, and we'll try and find somebody in our combined community to come and give their time and experiences, and hopefully it will help you going forwards. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. And this week I actually know who is talking next week. Next week we are going to be joined by Heather Douglas. She is a lawyer out of Ontario, and she's going to be talking about grit and happiness for lawyers, which I think is really important right now as well. And I think it flows really nicely.
Oh yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah, really well, I think. And so Heather's going to have some really interesting insights into grit and happiness, and how we as lawyers can use our grit, find our grit, and ultimately be happy with what we're doing in our lives. So I hope to see you all next week. Everybody stay healthy, look after your head. We'll need it. And if you guys do need anything at all, you know where to find us. And we'll see you all soon.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Very much.